It's 1917. A young man by the name of Vladimir Lenin arrives in Russia via a sealed German train to avoid being arrested by the authorities. He gets big into communism, working for revolutionary groups, writing for underground newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of the capitalist system, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Tsarist police, so he gets exiled to Siberia, escapes, flees to Europe, gets arrested again, goes back to Russia again, starts another revolution after the previous Tsar got overthrown, and then after a brief stint of sharing power with other revolutionaries, he finally seizes control as the leader of Soviet Russia. His speeches and revolutionary abilities made him famous among Russian communists. He was anti-capitalist, so when Western powers tried to intervene in the Russian Civil War in 1918, he fought back. And won. Then Lenin died in 1924, and along came Stalin. Stalin thought, wait a minute. We need to spread this communist revolution everywhere, defeat the capitalist West, and create a worldwide workers' paradise under Soviet leadership. And suddenly he was pro-world domination. But his fellow communists didn't like his brutal methods, so he had them shot. So then he said, you know what? We need something new. Not based on international brotherhood, but based on Soviet superiority. We'll conquer half the world and unite all peoples under the glorious red banner, just like my 5-year plans promised. I'll call it Spreading the Revolution, and it will guide the Soviet Union to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Stalin, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with a mustache. The Soviet Union had been on the winner's side in WW2, and they hoped they were going to control a lot of Eastern Europe. And in the end, they got exactly that, and felt pretty good about it. On top of that, a strong military and communist governments they'd installed meant that the Eastern European people were, well, let's say enthusiastic about their new Soviet friends. So when Stalin came along and said that he could spread communism everywhere, his movement gained a lot of support. In 1945, he went to his generals and said, we're keeping Eastern Europe, and there's nothing the West can do about it. And the West said, this army, fair enough. Then he went about establishing puppet governments with himself controlling everything from Moscow. The world had its first communist superpower. Next up, America. America had been on the winner's side, and they got absolutely terrified by Soviet expansion. They saw communist governments taking over in Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, had to deal with Stalin demanding control over half of Europe, couldn't have their nice capitalist friends ruling everything anymore, had to spend huge amounts of money they didn't want to spend, and a new rule was established that every American withheld the right to walk into any communist country, pick out any Marxist they wanted, and lecture them about freedom. I made that last one up, but it helps you understand how all of this felt to Americans. On top of that, nuclear weapons and global responsibilities meant that when a folksy man from Missouri came along and said that he could contain communism, the American people loved it. Truman had been Roosevelt's vice president, and he was crazy anti-communist. And nobody was madder than him about Soviet expansion. He helped establish NATO, and in 1947 announced the Truman Doctrine with his boys. And then he got really popular. His approval ratings grew and grew, and he believed America was the world's great destined defender of freedom, and he went full global policeman, establishing military bases with America at their center. The world had capitalist superpower number one. Truman and Stalin had completely opposite ideas, but more importantly, they had the same fear, each other, and they started to really not get along. Anyone else want to pick sides? Churchill? You good? I do. Who's that? It's China. And they've gone communist too. Let's rewind a bit. China had been fighting a civil war for decades, communists versus nationalists, until the Americans and Soviets got involved and said, you're going to fight with our weapons, and you're going to like it. Then, both superpowers started shipping tons of military aid, meaning China's civil war got way more deadly. The nationalists also had Chiang Kai-shek leading them. So the communists decided to win. They went to war with the nationalists to gain control over all of China, and they took the whole mainland. But then the West said, hey, we don't recognize your government. And since China couldn't take on the West alone, they said, okay, I guess we'll just make friends with the Soviets. Wait a minute. What are you doing? Creating NATO and military bases everywhere. But we just won our civil war. We know. And you guys won't even recognize us. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so. Okay, see ya. So China thought, screw this, and made an alliance with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually having nuclear weapons eventually. Then they fully supported North Korea, but they didn't stop there. In the Korean War, they took on American forces directly. And then in an incident that was maybe staged by the North Koreans, shots were fired across the 38th parallel, giving them an excuse to launch an invasion and take over South Korea. So here's the situation. The Soviet Union, Communist China, and their satellite states all believe communism is superior. All feel hostility towards the capitalist West and all want to spread their ideology and take over more countries. And so they did. Let's start with the Soviet Union. Stalin hated American capitalism, and now he was ready to begin spreading communism everywhere. In complete violation of Yalta agreements, communist governments were installed in Eastern Europe, nuclear weapons programs were started, and he built up his military. The Americans did something. The Marshall Plan. They sent money to Western Europe, giving aid to immediately rebuild if the Soviets showed up economically. The Soviets got annoyed. With his sphere of influence secured, Stalin could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase communist territory. And to do so, he needed more countries, or in other words, he would have to take over the world. But for now, half of Europe and Asia would do. And he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Americans finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly aggressive diplomatic strategy called containment. And it went a little something like this. Stalin would say, I want to make that country communist. And the Americans would say, you can't make that country communist. Okay, we'll send them military aid, but no more communist expansion. I want to make that country communist. And repeat. In 1948, Stalin blockaded West Berlin and just cut it off, with no supplies getting through. This is the crisis now. Next, he demanded the Western powers leave Berlin entirely, an enclave of capitalism surrounded by communist East Germany. The Americans held meetings and said, look, we're going to airlift supplies. Hang on. This is about my territory. Shouldn't the East Germans decide this too? Anyway, we're going to fly over your blockade. Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just don't shoot down our planes and we won't start World War III. Okay. Then the Berlin Airlift succeeded, with supplies flowing in by air, breaking the Soviet blockade, and we built a statue of the airlift pilots in their honor, and every day we celebrate the day the blockade was broken. The Soviets are testing nuclear weapons. What? They have the atomic bomb now. Oh, you have nukes too. What do you expect? I'm Stalin. Not to be outdone, America also wanted to get in on the action. Truman thought to himself, isn't there some small Asian country somewhere which is so strategically important that we'd fight a massive war there with our advanced military against their basic equipment and guerrilla tactics? Oh, there is? Korea? Fantastic. And so they fought there. America also wanted to control approaches to the Pacific, so they occupied Japan and built military bases. Then, in another incident that was maybe staged by the North Koreans, shots were fired across the 38th parallel by North and South Korean troops, and the Americans launched a military intervention in Korea. They swept through Seoul and Incheon, and then advanced north toward the Chinese border. It was here that saw some of the worst fighting when China entered the war against American forces. Back in Europe, America and Western Europe made their relationship status official by signing the NATO treaty. Then, Stalin turned his eyes towards more satellite states and the hated capitalist enclave of West Berlin. At this point, both sides really had to put their foot down. And they warned each other that direct confrontation would mean nuclear war. Both superpowers had planned to continue expanding their influence, but neither wanted to end up fighting World War III. So for now they made it a Cold War, saying, how about we both compete for global influence through proxy wars and espionage, and I definitely won't not refrain from not launching my nukes at you sometime in the future. Sounds terrifying. This new reality stunned the world. From 1945 onward, the world was divided between communist and capitalist spheres, and both superpowers were locked in ideological conflict. The globe fought by proxy, but they were no match for the two giants competing for influence from either side. Then came a period known as the Cold War, where everyone just sort of prepared for nuclear apocalypse while not directly fighting. And that's how the world almost ended, multiple times.